Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Endurance Physios podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Rockwater. I'm joined here with Dr. Will Gonzaba today. Today's topic, gait analysis. One of my favorite things. I know Will's super pumped about it too. Today, we are going to talk about what gait analysis is, why it's important, what techniques are used, what technology is used for gait analysis. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about some of the different methods that we use to do a gait analysis. And then finally, we'll wrap up with how to try and figure out how to find a good provider and somebody who actually knows what they're talking about gait analysis. So let's dive into it. Will, tell me, what is gait analysis? Let's start there.
Can I tell you kind of a funny story first?
Yeah.
So first semester in PT school, I remember I never heard the term gait like as referred to walking. And I remember the first lecture, they were like talking about a gait analysis or looking at someone's gait. And I was like, what the hell are they talking about? Like their gait, like at their house? Like how does this apply at all? Anyway, it didn't take too long. Things come full circle. And now that's like a big thing that I do is gait analysis.
Running analysis.
Gait analysis, basically what it is, it's the study of human locomotion. So that can be either walking or running. And basically what we're looking at is the mechanics behind how people move. And that can be a lot of different things for different people, right? So clinically, a lot of times that looks like just watching somebody walk. And it could be as simple as just the eyeball test, right? So looking to see how their hips move, how their torsos rotate, how their foot hits the ground. And truthfully, you can get a ton of really, really, really good information from doing that repetitively. And it could also be very advanced. There are so many tools out there that can measure joint angles specifically while you're moving. There's these 3D capture systems. There's force plates. There's so much different technology. So you can really get into the weeds of gait analysis and running and walking mechanics, which is really, really, really pretty cool. So, the goal today is to kind of help you guys understand like which one of these ways of studying gait or studying running or walking is most beneficial, both as a clinician and as a walker or runner, right? So it's anyone who moves. So it's super important information, something both Sam and I are really, really passionate about. So with that, Sam, what are some of the different techniques out there of performing gait analysis?
And you kind of hit it on a few of them. There's a lot of them. I would say the most common one is like a video analysis. And that can be something as simple as taking out like your cell phone, your iPhone or your Google Pixel or whatever it is, taking that out, literally recording in slow-mo mode, and then going back and literally like swiping side to side to see essentially breaking down that motion of running. The other, and it can be as complex too as like tens of thousands of dollars of camera systems. So a few of the universities, I know University of Wisconsin, Madison, is Dr. Brian Heiderscheit is one of the professors there, and he does a ton of research with gait analysis. And because of that, he has like an insane camera system. I've seen camera systems with 3 cameras. I've seen 5 camera systems. I've seen 20 camera systems where you can really dig deep into it. So it can be as easy or as complex as really you want it to be with the video analysis. The other thing too is you can also match up that video and have like motion analysis systems. So essentially putting like biomarkers on different joints. And those can be like accelerometers. Those can be just like data points for the video to track. There's some really cool ones out there as well. I know Run DNA makes a really cool one where it's just like a little camera and it essentially just tracks you, and then it creates like a 3D like gait of you running, which is really cool. And like a little figure. And it gives you a whole bunch of different metrics in there as well. So essentially, you can put those sensors and marketers on there, upload it to a software, combine that with the video, and you can get so much data in there. The other thing too that kind of is like the newish and like newest technology is like sensors and force plates. Um, I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like force plates, they're so new and there's so much data that you can get from force plates that it's really kind of challenging to decipher what's what and like where to kind of like determine that information and how to use it. There's a company
That's where the art. That's where
called
the art
Sensor
is in the middle
Medica,
of it.
and that's another. Yeah, yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. That's definitely the art. There's a company called. No, you're good, man. There's a company called Sensor Medica, and I've kind of been experimenting with some of their stuff. I have some people I know who have that system, and essentially it's literally paper thin. It's really cool. It's paper thin. It's literally in the outline of like an insole. You put it in your shoe, then you put your insole on it, and then it has a little like tab, and that essentially that tab kind of comes up on the back side of your shoe, and then you have a little like horseshoe that sits on there, and a little little module on the back of it. You plug in a little micro USB card, and you can literally go for a full marathon, and you can get that entire data. So every single second, every little force on there. So there's a lot of different things and a lot of different wearables. I know you've been experimenting with some wearables. Will, tell me about those.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we use this program called Run Easy. They're based out of the UK. So there are these PT, PhD fellows out there who created this software. And basically what it looks like is it looks like a heart rate monitor that is a belt. So it's got like the same little accelerometer, and you're going to wear that over your center of mass. So over your sacrum or your pelvis, right? So you're going to have someone wear that and go for a run. And it's much like the force plates that you're talking about, which is something I was really drawn to, is that with this system, I can watch someone run on a treadmill, but they can also go out and take it for a run up to 2 hours. It can be anywhere. Like I don't even have to be in close proximity. They can take it out and I can record it on my iPad and get that information from it. So to me, the type of information you get from this system, which I'll hit on a little bit later in the show, it's so actionable, and that's really something that I was important to me. So that's one of the wearables that we use. But I think you can even think about Garmin's now and the Apple Watches. You can look at understanding your stride length and cadence very simply, like that gives you so much insight into your running mechanics, right? There's other nuances, but man, just if you're going to strip it down, those two metrics, pretty dang good. You can do a lot with that. And I think, I think the newest Apple Watch has even more data on that. I think they might be able to break down ground contact time, left versus right, which is really, really cool and informative. So basically what that would be telling you is, okay, if you're familiar with cadence, right? For those of you who aren't, that's just, the amount of steps you take per minute. And so within that, you can break that down and say left foot versus right foot. What is our ground contact time? So how long is each foot on the ground, right? So it's measuring this in milliseconds. And so you can see huge asymmetries there in a lot of people, even in people who are like good, like solid runners that don't have any injuries. But almost all the time, if someone has a lower extremity injury, you're going to see a difference in ground contact time between the involved side and the non-involved side. So if you could get that information from an Apple Watch, that would be pretty sweet. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure one of my clients told me that they could do that nowadays, which is pretty awesome.
That is so cool. I had no idea. I had no idea that the Apple Watch
was
capable of that. It's cool.
I mean, you just have to think that it'll only get better and better. I think with the advances in technology and AI and algorithms, I mean, I don't know about that stuff, but you would just have to assume that the way things are going and the way that they can interpret data and make conclusions about what this means for your form and how you're absorbing forces is only going to get better from these little tiny devices. So yeah, I think, who knows what we'll be talking about 10 years from now, but I think where we're at right now is really cool because I can remember the force plates that I used in PT school were absolute garbage. And there was like those little mats. You probably saw them they have them at run stores like now. But they were, and the ones that they have now are a lot better. They're more slick, but we had this old ass laptop that took like 5 minutes to turn on. Like, I'm not kidding. So that's 5 minutes of your treatment session. And my CI would be like, turn on that laptop and do this force plate analysis. And I'd be like, why? It's going to take 15 minutes to get it warmed up. So anyway, I would do the thing, and you would have someone walk across it, and it would tell you where they're putting their pressure on the outside of the foot, inside of the foot, which is all good info. But to have something you can slip into a shoe is amazing, right? Like that's real time. That's real time. It's in the field, so you can't beat that. So those are some of the wearables. Some of the other one of the other ways that you can do a gait analysis is through this electromyography, which there's actually a fella here in town who does this. He actually used to sublease some space from my practice a couple of years ago. But basically what this EMG gait or run analysis is they're going to measure the activity in your the muscle activity throughout your legs while you're running. So you're going to wear these little electrodes, say like on your quads, on your glutes, on your hamstrings, on your calves. And as you run, it's going to tell us how those muscles are firing. And so you can compare, okay, well, as I'm running, my left glute isn't firing as much as my right glute or hamstring or quad or whatever it is, right? So it's going to give you a more detailed breakdown of how each of those muscles are contracting. I think what's cool about that is, you get that real-time data. You can have something that's objective that you can measure over time. I think for certain patients and clients, they kind of need that number or that visualization of seeing it. Personally, I think that unless it's like a lab setting, I think it can be a bit overkill. I think you can get a lot of that information from just a really solid clinical exam, but nonetheless, it is out there, and it is also a really solid way of doing the gait analysis as well. It's just a personal preference thing. So there's a tons of different ways to do this. I think the real thing comes to understand is, like, despite whatever method you're going to use, that data is only as good as the person that's interpreting it and applying it, right? And I think
100%.
that's kind of what I was mentioning to you when you're like, dude, there's like so much data that you get from these things, like knowing where to start. And that was really overwhelming for me using our Run Easy system initially. And that's pretty stripped down, but just refining your process of, okay, what does this data mean for the person that's in front of me right now? Like, what do we need to prioritize? And so just keep that in mind. It's like all of these things, they're all good and in the right place, but each of them is a tool, and whoever you're seeing needs to know how to use the tool appropriately and apply the information appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always tell my clients, and also too, I've been lucky enough to mentor some sports residents, and I essentially do the gait analysis lecture for them. And every time I just tell them, find the biggest rock, tackle that first, right? So find the one thing that you think is going to make the biggest difference. Start there, and then start tackling the smaller things, right? And sometimes it can be super easy to see that stuff, and other times, you can get turned around. I'm sure when you first started doing gait analysis, I know I know when I first started doing gait analysis, my head was spinning.
Yeah, what do they say? Don't get lost in the sauce. I mean, you have so much information flying at you, but I have a new staff PT who is wonderful, but I'm teaching him how to do this run analysis at the deeper level, right? Because using this data and everything, and that's exactly what you said is, okay, like, look, what's the lowest hanging fruit for this person? Like, what is the number one, whatever the lowest thing is, like, that's what needs to be addressed first before anything else can likely get better. And so once you kind of get that and understand that, gait is, and your run form is it's ever changing. It's evolving, right? And so you can't expect that within one session that you're going to correct everything. Like, actually, most of these things are going to take months to fix. Like, some of these things we can correct within a session, but a lot of them just take time of practicing your muscles, tendons, joints, adapting to new form, or maybe it requires you just to be getting stronger in the weight room in order for this form to improve. So, there are a lot of factors to it. And that's, kind of winding it all back is that's the art of it, right? Is saying, okay, well, that's what we saw with this system that we used, whatever it is. And then making it simple for your runner, for your client to understand what they need to do. Right. So, I've been doing more and more run analysis over the past like 4 years, right? So as I've gotten more into the niche, and the more I do it, the more I love it, because I've just found the biggest differences in that you can make in someone's programming. So whether whether that's someone that's coming to me because they have an injury or someone that's coming to me for performance gains, having a deeper insight into how what their running mechanics look like, it makes me dial in their treatment program so much more. So, like for example, one of the things that we look at in our with our run analysis is we can measure the differences in how you're absorbing force on the left leg versus the right leg, and how hard you're landing on the left leg versus the right leg, right? So imagine that someone comes into you and they have let's say like an Achilles tendinopathy, right? So Achilles tendonitis, their Achilles all screwed up. Once they're at a spot where they can run better, we're going to get them on a treadmill and we're going to see what this looks like. And so if at this point in their treatment plan, they're mostly asymptomatic, but we're seeing that when they land, that left side is just really smacking the ground hard, and they're having a hard time absorbing force on that left leg compared to the right leg. That's how you can totally shift the direction of your treatment from that point forward, right? So now we know, okay, like you're landing harder on this side, you're having a harder time with force absorption, your symptoms are down. So maybe now we need to be working more eccentric load to the quads, the hams, the glutes, begin some low-level plyometrics to teach that limb how to absorb force better, to get it up to speed to the right side. So it can really, and what's awesome is now that you've measured it objectively with that system, you can keep tracking that over the next couple of weeks. Like I have a guy right now, I was telling him today, he was like such a good example. So he's an ultra runner, and he came in with a quadricep tendinopathy after a backyard ultra. You're familiar with those, where I think they run like 4 miles every hour for 24 hours.
Oh gosh,
like
man.
that, right?
Those ultra marathoners, I'll tell you what, they are crazy. I've started treating a few ultra marathoners. I love it. It's such a cool community.
They're crazy.
They are crazy. But anyways, continue.
They're crazy, but they're so chill. Like they're the best. You know what I mean? Like they're super dedicated, but like
100%.
They're just laid back compared to other endurance athletes. Not calling anybody out, but you know who you are. Anyway, so like you do. So anyway, so we like the quad tendinopathy thing, like that cleared up pretty quick once we started with the correct loading exercises. And now like asymptomatic, miles are back up. And like all we did is we kind of check in on that run form and measure these key things like force production and absorption, dynamic stability. So what his core strength is, and impact magnitude. So how hard he's landing left leg versus right leg. We check that briefly every section as part of his warm up. And then I've just dialed in the strength programming to address those things. And for him, it was a lot of force absorption, right? So he's strong in the core, but like he doesn't do a lot of heavy resistance training, no history of plyometric training. So it's really teaching his body how to do those things. And he's a youngish guy, right? Like in his late 20s. And so he's just adapting to this, so quickly. So it's really fun to see that. So that's, to me, just to kind of summarize that point is, you can use this data to really dial in what you're doing with someone, either from the performance standpoint or from a treatment standpoint, right? And it creates a lot of buy-in, and I think it's something that you can use to guide your treatment approach from that point. And I'll just say here too, Sam, before turning it over to you to kind of talk about what you've really liked about having run analysis in your practices. One thing that I like to hit home with all my clients is that, there's two parts to this run analysis piece, right? There is your run form. So your mechanics while you're running, that's one piece. The second piece is your body, like the body that you bring to running. If y'all are familiar with Jay DeSherry, that's, he says in one of his courses that you impact your run form and your run form impacts you. And so you can't separate the two, right? And what that means is that sometimes when we're watching people run, the faults that we might see, some of those things can be corrected by cueing. So I could say, Sam, like you're overstriding, like pull your foot in and boom, you can make that change on the spot. We changed that today, right? You walked out the door making that improvement. But some of these things, let's say Sam is super weak in the hips and he's rotating all over the place. He can't stabilize his core. Like I could give him maybe a little cueing that'll improve that, but that's something that Sam's going to have to work on in the gym, right? And he's going to have to improve the strength in his hips, in his core, and that his body, as it gets stronger, will then look better as it's running. But that's a process. Like that could take months. But that's
or
really,
years
it's really, or
in
years.
some
Yeah.
case.
Yeah, exactly. I think in fact, when we look at how runners absorb forces, I think that one specifically, their efficiency with absorbing forces, it improves with more running. So it's one of those things that if it's especially a new runner, like this is just a progressive thing. It's going to get better the more you do it. Right. So you really have to educate people to be patient. And for you listeners who maybe have tried to improve your cadence, that's a big one that people focus on, and it's important, but just understand, like, we're not going to go from, let's say you have a 150 cadence or 160. We're not going to go from that to 180 overnight. Right. So it's progressive. It takes time to make those changes. So those are some of the things that I've found really important over time. I'm interested to know your take on why you think run analysis is important and why you've liked it in your practice.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you covered a lot of the same topics that I think. I think one of the most important things that I've found, right now, I'm treating a female ultra marathoner, and we've done all of our clinical tests. We've gone through the evaluation process. Um, we are working on core. We're working on hip strength. We're working on, hamstring to quad ratios, right? So like making sure the hamstrings are strong enough for the quads. We're going through all these different things. And she's having a sartorius tendonitis, which is kind of an unusual place to have a tendonitis. Went in for hydrodissection, and now is just struggling to get back. And it's frustrating for her 100% because, she just wants to get back and run. And, one thing that is really important that we talked about is, hey, like, let's clean up these things clinically first, right? Like, you have some weaknesses, you have some tightness, right? Your core stabilization isn't quite there. And now that's improving. And now we're starting to get back to that, like, return to running program. And all of a sudden now it's kind of flaring up again. And so I think one of the most important reasons for doing gait analysis is really it helps you get a whole picture of the runner and like why potentially their injury has been, like, why they got that injury. What is the root cause of that injury, right? Is there something, for example, I haven't done the gait analysis on this lady yet, but our goal is to get it in within the next couple weeks here, as we start her return to run program. But there has to be something in that gait pattern that is just aggravating that sartorius. Sartorius, for those of you who don't know, is a muscle. It goes from essentially your front of your hip bone, your ASIS, and it comes down and across your thigh. It's an unusual muscle to get a tendonitis in, but it does happen.
I've seen it before too.
Yeah, it does happen, unfortunately. Yeah, it's rare. But anyways, something in her gait pattern is causing that flare up because she takes time off, she's good, and then she starts running again and it flares up. Then we work on some more stuff, she takes some more time off and then flares up again. And I think, honestly, that's why it's so important to do a gait analysis, is because if you don't have that clinical skill, or if you don't go and get a gait analysis, we're just going to be going in circles. Right. And that's something that I've talked to her about and had an honest conversation and said, hey, like, we need to do a gait analysis because there is something going on here, because everything else is checking out. You're checking all the boxes and that kind of thing. And I think that's, to get like a whole picture of a runner, that's one thing that you have to do, but also like treatment wise, right? If you go out and you do a gait analysis on somebody, it's not a one size fits all, right? And that,
Right.
listeners will know that, because if you go and watch a marathon or even a 5K, right? Go and watch a marathon. Marathons are my favorite to watch. They're great people watching, first of all. But second of all, go and watch at mile 20, 21, right? And you watch people running, and there are people who are like lean, mean, fighting machines, and they look awful. They look like they are struggling so hard. And then you go in and you look at somebody and you're like, wow, they are not exactly what I thought a runner would be, and they are
Mm-hmm.
cruising, right? And you're just like, what? How is this going on, right? So it's so hard to cram. Um, it's so hard to cram like treatments and people into like a certain category unless you really do that gait analysis. And once you do that gait analysis, you'll find out that everything has to be individualized. We know that from our physical therapy background, but that's something though that people should be aware of, is that like everything is individualized. At least if you're going to the proper place, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. Um, but that's something that's super important. The other thing, you talked about optimizing form and being able to essentially, excuse me, being able to have those runners now all of a sudden start to like work on a treatment plan, work on a strength plan, right? And like identifying what exactly it is. I think it's really important because you can also too find the most efficient way to run through that. And I know you mentioned that, and I want to echo that, because those new runners, it's really hard to like start running and not have an injury, because of the forces on your body. I think, what is it? Your ankle is like 7 to 9 times your body weight. Your knee is like 3 to
35,
7
yes.
times your body weight. I haven't looked at it in a long time, but it's a lot of force that's going through all those joints. And it's really important that like your form and like your ability to get through that run, especially if you start going any distance, is like that. It's okay to do that, and that you're not going to cause any long-term damage.
Yeah, I think one thing that people, so the beauty in running is that we're all built to do it, right? I think you put on your shoes, you go out the door, and boom, you're running. That's the beauty in it. But you also have to recognize too that it's also a sport that has a form, and that form can be different from everyone. Just kind of like a baseball bat when you swing, like someone swing the way people swing. I'm not a baseball player, but the way you swing a bat is going to differ.
Use golf.
Sure, I don't golf.
Golf
either.
is a great example.
Golf, right? Your golf swing is going to be different from player to player, right? Your run form can be different from person to person, but the point is that it can still be efficient while looking different, right? And so there is a skill to that, and understanding that no matter your level, so beginner to end, or to veteran, right? Experienced runner, like it's important to know that. So for you newbie runners, getting coaching on that, whether that's through a run coach or a physio in your area who knows how to do run analysis, who's familiar with the mechanics, that's so beneficial because you can get so much from that. In fact, those are sometimes my favorite run analysis to do, or someone who they're just fresh, they just want to learn, and you're like, sweet, let me teach you, like, let me make this feel a lot better for you. So it can be so helpful for the runner, and it's a lot of fun as the provider too.
Yeah, well, I know you talked about like how you perform the gait analysis a little bit, and like how you like use that technology into like your gait analysis. And like you kind of briefly like touched on like provider and like finding that. Like, do you want to talk a little bit more about like anything in particular that like you do with your gait analysis, or more importantly, like when runners are going out to look for a gait analysis, like or like a provider who can provide that? Like, what are some really important things to look at, and what are some important things to like be aware of as you're starting like this process and like that vetting process of trying to find somebody who's reputable and who knows what they're talking about?
Sure. I'll hit on our process pretty briefly, but pretty much with our run analysis, it's an hour session, and I break it up into basically 3 parts. So the first 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to get to know my client, training history, what their volume's like, if they're training for anything big, medical history. So just kind of getting a good sense of what they want out of this session, and then having that as my base to build from. So that's part 1. Part 2, we're going to do a really thorough movement screen as it pertains to running. So there's a couple key areas of the body where I'm going to test mobility and strength. So for the most part, I'm looking at hip, ankle, great toe, range of motion, grossly, right? I might delve into some specifics based on what they're presenting with. And then I'm going to look at core strength, hip strength, and then based on time, maybe some calf strength. So I'm going to take them through some tests. And again, that will give me a good idea of the body that they're bringing to running. And then from there, I get them on the treadmill. I'll do a slow-mo video analysis from lateral views and posterior view just on the iPad. And then we'll use our software to look at a couple of different metrics. And so we're going to look at three main things. There's other things that we look at, but the three main things are dynamic instability. So we're looking at how much transverse plane motion the pelvis has. And what that means is how much like forward and backward motion you have. Visually, it's very easy to see frontal plane motion. So like how your hips rock, but this is going to tell us how much transverse plane motion you have. So we look at that. That's just an indicator of how strong your core and your hips are at stabilizing.
Well, can you explain transverse plane for those who aren't watching and seeing you do that?
Yeah, sure. Transverse plane motion, it's generally like it's rotations in the body for the most part. If we're going to keep it simple, it's rotations in the body. So like if you were standing and like imagine like shaking your hips forward and back, kind of like you're dancing, it's like that, right? So you're rotating forward and back. That would be an example of rotation of the pelvis and the transverse plane. So you're moving forward and backwards that way. And that's super important for running. So you need to have that transverse plane motion, but you need to be able to control it. So you can't be super loosey-goosey through the hips and through the core. So it'll measure that and it'll separate left versus right. The next thing we'll look at is impact magnitude. So that's how hard you're landing on the left leg versus the right leg. And then the third thing that we're going to look at is impact duration, which is one of my favorites, because that's going to tell us how long it takes the ground reaction force. And I'll explain that in a minute, but ground reaction force to travel from your foot to your center of mass. And so ground reaction force is basically like when your foot hits the ground, you're exerting a force into the ground, and then that ground is exerting a force into your body, right? So, and we're measuring how long it takes that force to go from your foot to your hip joint. Okay, and what we want that to be is a high number, because that means that your muscles are slowing down that force and it's not going straight to the joint, right? So it's really cool to see that, because that will really be very telling as to how you're going to program someone's exercises, right? Or what they need to be doing. So those are the three things that we'll look at. At the, we'll take a break. I'll give them some cueing as to what they should do. I'll review their findings. And then I try to just leave with a couple key takeaways, like, hey, here are the three cues you should work on. Here's number one that I would prioritize. In addition to this, here are 3 or 4 exercises that I would start working on. And most of the times we'll follow up in 4 to 6 weeks after they've had some time to implement that. So that's been a very successful formula that I've kind of come up with over the years. It's hard sometimes to cram all that into an hour, but you got to be moving and efficient and get it done. But to me, it's like, I wanted something that's very actionable, right? Like I think, and this will kind of get into your next question, was like, how do you find a good provider? Is when I was looking to add more data and objective measures into my run analysis, I wanted a system that would give me things that are numbers that are actionable, meaning like, okay, some of these like 3D motion capture systems where they're measuring a joint angle, like that's not that actionable for me to know what your shoulder flexion moment was, at mid stance. Like it's not that actionable. Like I can tell if it's too much or too little just from looking at it, right? And so that's the takeaway. And so I think with our system, it's very actionable data. Every single piece means something, and you can take away like, hey, I need to address this or I don't. And so I'm biased, but I think it's awesome. so it's actionable data. So
love it.
So when you're getting into like trying to find a provider to start with this, I think this is one of the things, like you do need to vet the provider, because when you look at most PT clinics in your area, like every single one of them is going to say that they do run analysis. Like every single website I bet says it, just as a way of populating higher on Google searches or whatever. And truthfully, like every PT does learn this, but what that usually means in a standard PT clinic is they're maybe will watch you run on a treadmill, maybe for like 5 minutes. And they'll be like, looks all right. Maybe you have a little bit of hip drop, and that's about it, right? It doesn't really go much further than that. And I would say you'll be lucky if you're a runner and you get that PT to get you on the treadmill, right? So all that to say is, don't, just because a place says that they do run analysis, a PT clinic, I should say, says that they do run analysis, you want to make sure that either that the provider there is like has a background in endurance sports and that you will be seeing that provider, or that you can just tell from their social media posts or whatever that they're clearly like experts within that niche or have a lot of experience within that niche versus other places, right? And I think it's pretty apparent to tell from the website. So takeaway is, don't think just because every place that says that they do a run analysis is going to give you a good one. So that's that. I think for Sam and I, we're a little bit biased in saying that I think PTs are arguably the best place for doing this because we have an understanding of the body mechanically. Like that's basically what our doctorates are in. And then if you can combine that with someone who is an expert in endurance sports or has a run coaching background or knows a lot about run form and run mechanics, maybe they did their research on that. That person is who you want to who you want to go with for sure with this. So just vet the provider, do your research, ask your friends because it makes a big difference. And I'll just give like one, not to be like too rambly, but I'll just give one like word of caution is like with this, anything that gets into measuring things athletically, there can be a lot of smoke and mirrors behind that. Like you can really make this look like super complicated and it'll look super fucking cool on, super cool on Instagram. With like all the joint angles measured and, the little chart of your quad firing and like, that's cool. Like it's cool, but like, is it necessary? And is that data going to be interpreted in a meaningful, actionable way? Probably not. It might be an overkill, right? So just be cautious of that, right? Like just because something looks cool on Instagram or whatever, like doesn't actually translate into real life all the time. So vet the provider, vet the practitioner.
That's it, Will. That's it. I was just gonna say that's it. Well, I just need to be really cool on Instagram now, huh?
It helps, dude. I mean, honestly, I think our run analysis should look a little bit cooler on Instagram. I think it should, but just make some good decisions based off the cool information. That's all I'm saying. So I think that's my tidbits. You got anything to add on that?
For like finding a provider. I think the biggest thing is to see if they've taken additional courses as well.
Good point.
And like has the provider taken a gait analysis course? Have they at least, beyond what's just required in school? Because we all have a little bit in school, but it's not necessarily a deep dive into gait. But if you take an actual gait analysis course, like you're going to get something out of it, and that's going to be a little bit higher level of gait analysis. I think also too what you said about all the data and stuff, like that's really awesome. But if you can't apply it, it's no good to you. And I see that a lot with other things in the endurance world, like sometimes bike fits, which I'm sure we'll talk about at a later date. But gait analysis, and we were talking about all those force plates, like all that info is really cool. Like I'm so excited to try out those little like in bed foot like force plates. I'm so excited to try them, but I get the data and I'm like, I have no idea what to do with this, right? Like it sounds crazy, but like that's the actual reality, right? Like, and I think that's the science portion behind it. And I think what we're trying to allude to is that there's also an art portion to it. And that's like the provider being able to see what's going on and being able to actually like, okay, here's what's going on in your gait. Here's what's going on when you run, right? And here's an actionable takeaway. Here's how you can go and you can like actually fix this. I've taken so many continuing education courses I can't even count anymore. And all the time when I go, especially like conferences, physical therapy conferences, the biggest struggle is when they lecture on something and then they don't give you anything actionable to take away and go and do from that lecture, right? Like, okay, all this data is great, but it's not necessarily like going to help me tomorrow in my clinical practice, right? And like the runner should be the same way, right? Like, okay, all this data is great, but what do I do tomorrow when I go for my run, right? Is there something that I want to work on? Is there something that I need to focus on? Are there a couple of quick actionable takeaways that I can get to like actually improve my gait, either prevent injury, improve performance, whatever that is. And I think that's something really to look forward at, like when you look for a provider. In terms of like, circling back about like performing gait analysis, I don't have that same technology. I don't quite use that same technology. My process is very, very similar. So I'll take a history. Most of the time, I prefer to do an evaluation of that runner before I do a gait analysis.
Sure.
That's just my own personal preference. Now, I will do a gait analysis just right off the bat. And then I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into like have them on a table, and I'm going to start taking them through range of motion and, testing quad length, hamstring length. I'm going to check hip internal, external rotations, ankle range of motion. Like I'm going to look through their entire range of motion, including their lumbar spine and their thoracic spine as well. Mm-hmm. When I get to the gait analysis, I have this little like form that I have, and I actually give it to the runner at the end of the session. And essentially what it is it goes through all the different joint angles, and like the whole time I'll go back and I'll review all that. And as I'm reviewing it, I'm also educating the runner. Mm-hmm. Hey, this is what I see, and this is what I'm looking for. This is what we call quote unquote normal or ideal, and this is where you're at, right? And so then they have an idea of all the different faults that they potentially are doing. And then they can also see what's going on with that, right? So if they have what we call pelvic drop. So pelvic drop, I'll explain it. Essentially, you look at the runner from behind, and if they're, it sounds terrible, but essentially if their hips drop to one side or the other, when their one leg is what we call a mid stance. So when their foot is directly underneath their body and that other leg is kind of swinging forward. The best way I can describe pelvic drop, and it's kind of terrible, but everyone understands it. Have you ever been to the grocery store, Will, and you see the lady who kind of like her hips just kind of drop side to side as she walks?
Yes, of course.
but everyone has seen that, right? And so that is pelvic drop, and everyone can understand that is pelvic drop. Then when I, and I'll tell all my runners that I'm like, yeah, like the old lady who, kind of drops side to side, or the old guy who, can't really control his hips, and it looks like his butt kind of shakes up and down, but it's not really supposed to. That is pelvic drop. And so I will go through my sheet with them, and I will essentially have all the different faults, right, including pelvic drop, which is one that people oftentimes can see very readily. And once I describe it, they're like, oh my gosh, I see it. And I've found that if a runner can see things and like see what they're doing wrong, it connects so much more with them, and with how they're going to potentially like fix that issue, right? They're more inclined to fix it. And then they feel also too like they got more out of that gait analysis, because they're like, holy crap, like I know what to look for now, right? And so then, if they want to do self check-ins, in between or whatever, can, hey, hey friend, can you, video me? I want to check and see if this is any better, right? And kind of go through that. But I'll go through that, and then essentially I will go through that. I'll tell them what the biggest, again, what I call rocks. So what the biggest rocks are. And then from there, I will give them correctives for it, whether that be strength or like a running drill, to try and help correct that. And then check back in with them again, normally 4 or 6 weeks, same as you, month or two, and just kind of check in and see how they're doing. And then kind of, go from there. I think that's something that has been, very beneficial for like my gait analysis practice. Patients love that they can take that, sheet home, and then, they can like analyze it and deep dive into it and try and like remember what those were and that kind of thing. So that's what I've done for gait analysis, and I think it's been really helpful. I'd love to start incorporating, and maybe we need to have another talk about what you got going on there with the with the run and like the other technology that you're using, and see if maybe, you know, that would be a good fit for me as well.
We should have those guys on the show. They would love to be on it. They're awesome. They're super good, man. Their education that they provide for
They're
providers.
Brits, right?
Yeah, they're top notch, man. And they work with Olympians. They got to be good.
They got to be good. Talk about some familiars, right?
Yeah,
they got to be good. Yeah.
No, that's awesome though,
Awesome.
man. It's kind of validating, right, to know that you're doing something similar. So I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy, because I kind of just came up with this method kind of with guidance, but like, it's just what I've come to.
Yeah.
All right, y'all. So, I hope that this information shed some light onto what gait analysis and run analysis is all about. Obviously, it's something Sam and I are very passionate about, and sadly, I kind of feel like we just scratched the surface. Like, we didn't even like really talk about run form at all. Like,
100%, man. Just scratch the surface.
That could be another hour.
We could talk hours about this.
Literally, like, there are so many little segments that I just wanted to go off on something, but maybe that's another podcast. Anywho, so I hope that we answered y'all's, informed y'all on why this is an important thing, an important aspect of your running. Some different techniques that you can seek out in terms of getting this gait analysis done and run analysis done. You understand why it's important. And you understand how to find providers in your area who could do this for you. So we hope you all thought this was informative. Thank you all so much for listening. If there's any bits about run form or run analysis y'all want to know more about, please reach out to us through our Instagram or on our YouTube page, where we'll be happy to delve into different topics on run form and run analysis. So thank you all for listening. Please download the podcast, subscribe. We'll have this up on our YouTube page shortly. So that's a great way you can show support for the show. Thanks a lot, y'all. Talk to you soon.
See you guys. Thank you.